Good morning, and welcome to the 53rd Prix de West Invitational Art Exhibition and Sale. Here to begin today's program is the McCaslin Chair of Cowboy Culture and Curator of Native American Art and Ethnology at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Dr. Eric Singleton.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us as we kick off our 2025 Prix de West Seminars. As the nation's premier Western art exhibition and sale, Prix de West honors the spirit of the American West through the exceptional artists who are selected to participate annually. Today's seminars will showcase artistic techniques, industry insights, and current movements in Western fine art, along with firsthand stories and perspectives shared by our featured artists. This tradition continues because of the generosity of the sponsors recognized on screen. If you see anyone wearing a white ribbon this weekend, please let them know how much we appreciate their support and contributions. Special thanks to our seminar sponsors, Wendy and Stephen Olshan. Many people enjoy taking home a memento from Prix de West. Our commemorative Prix de West Bolo and catalog are available for purchase in our store, Persimmon Hill, located near the front entry. While you're there, we encourage you to explore the trunk shows located right inside the entrance. Although the museum will close today at 4 p.m., Persimmon Hill will remain open until 7:30. Also tonight, beginning at 6 o'clock, society members, sponsors, and ticket holders are invited to attend the cocktail reception in the galleries. Guests will have the opportunity to mingle with the artists while viewing the exhibition. Tomorrow at noon, we'll announce the winner of the 2025 Prix de West Purchase Award. And tomorrow evening, our highly anticipated art sale will take place with cocktails in the galleries beginning at 5 p.m., where you can begin dropping ballots on your favorite pieces. Our celebration will continue with the presentation of awards and dinner here in the Sam Noble Special Events Center. We are thankful to have you joined for this exciting weekend. We begin our seminars with Pencils, Brushes, and Paint, Living a Dream by C. Michael Dudash. Michael began his full-time career as an artist and oil painter in 1977. Working with agents in New York, he found immediate success as a freelance illustrator, which brought him national notoriety and a career that lasted 25 years. In 2002, he left his illustration work behind and became a full-time painter in the fine art world. He quickly found that painting the characters and history of the Old West excited him, and since 2006, this has been his focus and singular subject matter. Please welcome Michael Dudash.
Boy, I need to start out by saying, proud to be an Okie from Muskogee, a place where even artists can have a ball. Good old Merle. Always loved Merle Haggard. He sort of stole a little bit of my thunder about what I wanted to talk about, how we get going, but I've got a couple of other things to say. First, I want to thank Susan Patterson and the whole committee and the museum for asking me to do this. It's a little terrifying, but it's a pleasure to be here. It's very kind. Prix de West is an incredible show. It's the Academy Awards of Western Art, as far as I'm concerned. So for me to be standing here, I sort of have to pinch myself, I guess, as I talk about my career and show everybody some artwork. So I think I'll start by saying why using this title, Pencils, Brushes, Paint, and Living a Dream, because as a young man, I did have a dream from as far back as I can remember. To be in the arts, visual arts as well as music, and I didn't know what that dream would be. As dreams are, you only can see part of them, and you're not sure how it's going to manifest itself in your life. So it's been a long, crazy journey, and one of the things that the subject came from is from the committee itself. They'd heard some podcasts I had done, and I had talked about my eclectic career. And they thought it was very fascinating to go from an illustrator to become a gallery and a fine artist, especially ending up in Western art, which is actually a pretty solid tradition in the Western art market. It goes all the way back to Charlie Russell and Frederick Remington in the 1800s, where Remington really was particularly was an illustrator, and he transformed later on in his life to be an iconic Western artist. So that's been a tradition for the last 150 years. There are several artists in the show, some of my compatriots, so to speak, Morgan Weisling, Thomas Blackshear, Eric Bowman, probably forgetting a few other ones. They were illustrators and ended up in the middle part of their career doing Western art. You've got Howard Terpenine, Frank McCarthy, Tom Lavelle, to name just a few. So I follow in that tradition. So they asked me to talk about that and explain what my particular journey is all about. And so that's really where the title came from, and we'll talk about that as I show you a bunch of artwork. The difficult thing is that with a 48 or 50-year career, I've told people I've got like 2,300 pieces of art in my database. So how do you talk about that in an hour? So I'm just going to say, fasten your seatbelts, because I'm just going to fly through a bunch of stuff. But the whole point of that is not to overwhelm you with the number of pieces of art I've done, but just to try to show you this journey I've been on. And every artist in here and in the show, really throughout the Western art, has their own story. They've got their own winding road that they've taken and how they developed to where they are today. I never in my wildest dreams imagined I'd be standing in front of you with a cowboy hat on, president of Cowboy Artists of America right now. And you'll see how this all transformed throughout my life and career. So I just appreciate you all coming. I really do. And I look at you like family. And one other piece of housekeeping. If you have a question during my presentation, I'll try to allow like 10 minutes at the end for any questions. If you do ask a question, go to one of the microphones. There's 3 of them here, so that it can be on tape and everybody can hear what you ask. If during the presentation you have something you just can't hold in, and you just, I gotta ask this right now, stand up and get my attention, and I'll try to fit you in. But it might be a little bit easier to do it all at the end, but I'm not discounting anything that happens here. So anyway, so let me get going on this thing, and I'll try to follow along as best I can. Occasionally I'll use the pointer. So let's get started. So this is the beginning, 1952. I was born in Mankato, Minnesota, in southern Minnesota, a small town. And you can see I was graduated from high school in 1970. I took all the art classes I could. My mother was an artist, amateur, and she encouraged art and music in our home, as I was growing up. And it was kind of a no-brainer for me to ultimately want to be an artist. Really, I was in art school basically a little bit. I had a little bit of training. I was a full-time musician for about 6 years, and I'll show you some pictures of that. And did a freelance illustration career based out of New York City. I was living in New England with my wife, and we had agents in New York. And we'll talk about that as we go along. And then around 2001 or so, I became a full-time easel and gallery artist, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So here we go with yours truly. There's me with it looks like some kind of portfolio book. I'm actually 25 right there. No, I'm really not. No. So I'm a lifelong musician, and I wanted to be, I started playing guitar when I was 12, and I was very serious about it, and I was playing in bands by the time I was 18, and did it until I was 25, and that's also me. Hard to believe I ever looked like that, but I came pretty close to that. Was maybe going to be my career. But I always did artwork all through this time, and by the time I was out of high school, I could draw very well. I did it all the time. These are just some samples of things I did when I was in high school or shortly thereafter. I did a lot of pen and ink, pencil. I ended up living in Vermont for a while because that's where the band ended up, out in New England. I left Minnesota, And let me see here. I'm looking at without having to turn around. That's a pen and ink I did when I was living in Vermont. And the other one on the right, I took, that's my first oil painting ever in an art class when I was 18, of a still life in the painting class. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but it was my first serious oil painting. These are some more drawings, which is really what directed me more toward an illustration career, because if you can't draw and have good design skills, you're never going to make it in that particular industry. So I did a lot of pen and ink early on, just as an example. And so when I'm in New England doing a lot of landscapes. So my illustration career really started in 1977 when I was, frankly, 25. I had a painting and a drawing in a student art show. I was temporarily in art school in Minneapolis, and an art director called me up. We have an opening a few months from now for a staff illustrator and mechanical artist, and do you want the job? She offered it to me just based on a painting and a drawing. So at that point I said, okay, because I need to make some money, and I thought I'd give it a try. And that, I thought it'd be for a few years. It ended up being 23 years, you know. So one of the things I want to talk briefly about is, I think you all know what an illustrator is. The skill set we have is as painters and drawers, those who create representational art. It kind of translates from illustrator to fine artist, you know, your ability to draw and paint and design artwork. But it's a whole different mindset when you're an illustrator, because you're solving people's problems, you're creating commercial work for movies, books. I'll show you a wide variety of things I did. It creates a tremendous foundation for you, no matter where you want to go as an artist. So that's really the main difference. When you leave that behind and you become a fine artist, or a gallery artist, or an easel painter, you're coming up with your own ideas, your own subject, you're expressing yourself. And that's really the main difference. So it's a psychological, spiritual sort of thing you go through when you transfer from illustrator into untethering yourself from the dock and floating out into the lake, and let's just see what happens, you know. It's a little scary, actually. So these are just a couple of samples. The one on the left is an Eddie Bauer catalog cover. It's Christmas toys around the Christmas tree. The other one was for Field and Stream magazines, fly fishing in Africa. So you're illustrating articles. And these are some other things. I did a bunch of TV Guide covers. How many of you remember TV Guide? Now, we've got some old timers in here, you know. So one of my, there was the Fall Guy. One of the more well-known ones was Elvis Presley. Interesting about that, I own the original art. When you do an illustration, the clients are supposed to send it back to the artist. They reproduce it. So I got a call from the offices in Philadelphia, and they said, well, we have some sad news. Your Elvis painting got stolen out of the editorial offices, so you're not getting that one back. So we filed an insurance claim, and I think I got $1,500 or something for that. Anybody sees that on somebody's wall? You know how to get in touch with me, because it's mine. Actually, it belongs to the insurance company, but wouldn't that be fun to get back? So the one on the left was for a magazine called Guideposts. He was an old lumber farmer, the guy in Vermont. He dug a foundation for my first house, and Francis Cathan, and I asked him if he'd be willing to pose. He had no idea what I was talking about, so he was my first model for that, leaning on his pitchfork. There's the 60 Minutes crew. That was for an inside illustration for TV Guide. The one on the left that was for the Reader's Digest. Yeah, I think it was for an advertising mailer. And the one on the right, a bunch of authors. Hemingway, Willa Cather, I don't know. There's a bunch of them in there. So this is typical of the kind of work I was doing as an illustrator. A lot of drawing and oil washes. It had this kind of look that I became known for. These are like inside illustrations for an advertising brochure for also the Reader's Digest. I think it was Johann Strauss's music. And so I'd work with models, maybe out of New York. I was living in the mountains of Vermont, and I had a studio there. So I was hired to do this kind of work. So obviously your painting and drawing skills have to be top notch, to do this kind of work. And this career, by the way, has kind of gone the way of the blacksmith. Around the year 2000, computers pretty much changed that whole industry. But the illustration tradition is very, very rich, and I was a big part of that at the beginning of my career and the end of an era, so to speak. Here's some other smaller pieces I did. Tchaikovsky is a piece of art. It was on a cassette cover, I think. I don't even know what the middle one is. Or likewise with the other one, there's a description on there. I can't read it, but these are typical of the kind of work I was doing as an illustrator. As we go through this, you might see some things. If you know my work now as a Western artist, you might see some techniques or some looks that have translated into the Western art market, into what I do now. I did a series of cassette covers on classical composers for Time Life, and here's a few of them. I had fun doing these. I could experiment and do some interesting techniques. I did a lot of sports stuff in my career. The one on the left is a Nike. It was for a Nike tournament. I can't remember. I think it might have been the Ozarks Open, something like that. And that's my son-in-law swinging the golf club. I used family and friends wherever I could as models. My wife's been in plenty of paintings, even as a man. I need, no offense, dear, but you're going to be a 6'4", discus thrower, And I also did a couple of limited edition prints with the U.S. Polo Association. When living in Vermont, it was kind of a ski area, so there was actually a polo league there, so I could go out on the field and photograph guys playing polo in the mountains of Vermont. It was pretty cool. The one on the left is a painting of Pele. I worked with a small publishing company out of Las Vegas, and I did some limited edition prints. So he contracted with Pele and his management company to do a limited edition print. And you all know who Pele is, I hope. Probably the most famous athlete in the world at that time. He'd never done a print before. So I worked with them, and this is what I came up with. So I signed the print, and Pele signed it. And I have the original painting in my studio, if anybody's interested. I'll take, you want to make me an offer. So this is the kind of thing you run into. I'm going to have some various kinds of stories I'm going to sidebar off to show you what it's like to be an artist, because you never know what's going to happen or who's going to be on the other end of that phone when it rings. And I always had the attitude that I'm willing to talk to anybody about anything. We've got to make a living. We're artists. And this is part of that dream that I had no idea where it was going to go. Probably at this point, I was already saying, how did I get here? I didn't really even, it just happened. So I wanted Pele to actually sign the original oil painting. So I contacted his management company in New York, and they were being kind of a real pain about it. And so I was willing to send them the painting, and Pele was willing to do it. He came to the United States a couple times a year, and never happened. So I'll show you another print in a minute where somebody famous did sign the painting, which I still have. The one on the right actually is the first TV Guide cover I ever did, and that's probably like 1980, I would think, I'm guessing. And so we backed up there to, a baseball cover. And they'd put type on the top, and you know what magazine covers look like. I had a chance in 1985 to do a big project for Converse Corporation. They make sports shoes. They were building a new corporate headquarters outside of Boston, so they contacted me to do. They wanted me to do a huge wall mural, and I talked them into doing 6 different separate paintings. So we could do separate limited edition prints, and they could move the paintings around, because I know how things go. If it's on a wall, you're not moving it. So they went along with that. And these were all sports figures that were sponsoring their shoes. You had Jimmy Connors, Larry Bird, Chris Everett Lloyd, Magic Johnson, Dr. J, and Don Mattingly. So these paintings are big. The vertical ones are 8 feet high, and the other ones are roughly 6 by 7 feet. They're painted on aluminum panels I had manufactured in New York with linen on them. So they're very lightweight. They're aircraft aluminum. They should outlast the next millennia, I think. I don't know. So that's what they look like on the wall. Here's just a close-up of a couple of them. And we were supposed to have a big dinner to dedicate the building, but the company ran out of money, so I was looking forward to meeting all these celebs, sports celebs. But I did get to meet one. There's Chris Everett, and so I'm visiting with her in front of her painting, and there's a close-up of Larry Bird. I met him. I was standing in an airport in Pittsburgh a few years later, and who walks and stands next to me is Larry Bird. Hi, Larry. And I was too embarrassed to tell him who I was, because he hated the press. He wouldn't want to talk to me anyway. But it was maybe an opportunity to say, hey, I painted your painting. I don't know why I told you that story. It's pretty boring. So here's an example of, very primitive example of how this would work. I'd get an idea from an art director and a marketing team for whatever the company or publisher was. I did a series of, so here's an example. I did a series of paintings for the 1988 Summer Olympics. It was for Time Buick again. They were going to run ads in subsequent many magazines. So I ended up doing six or eight of them. So I would send in a sketch, and you can see that's a carbon pencil, which is sort of like a charcoal and a pencil. And that would be an example I'd send to the art director, and then there's the final painting next to it. So these were run in magazines. I think I still own the originals. Sometimes the clients would buy the original paintings, actually. I may still have those. I've still got, I don't know, like 500 or 600 illustration paintings in my storage. So, but that's an example. I was asked to do the poster for the AT&T National, or it's Pebble Beach, whatever the title is, Pro-Am. You probably know that tournament. It's celebrities playing with professional golfers. So they asked me to do this one. I think it's the year 2000. Maybe somebody of you can see it. But Tiger Woods had won the tournament the year before, so they wanted me to do a painting of Tiger Woods. And this was like a pro bono kind of thing, And I said, well, to do the job, if I can take the oil painting and come to the tournament, and we can auction it off, and I'll give a percentage of it to the Children's Hospital of Monterey. And they thought that was a great idea. So, I'm always thinking, yeah, I'll do it for free, but, I got somebody going into college here, and so as an artist, you've got to be left brain, right brain, you're a businessman as well as a creative person. And they thought that was a great idea. So I sent the painting out there. It showed up in a big crate, and they told me this story 3 or 4 days before the tournament, and one of the directors, it wasn't Clint Eastwood, Clint Eastwood's one of the big sponsors of that tournament. Another guy, a friend of his, was walking by, and he said, what's that? It's the painting for the poster. Well, open it up. They opened it up. He said, we're not auctioning that off. I'm buying it right now. So I was over the moon, and they called me and they said, well, how much do you want for it? And I won't tell you what I asked, but it was probably more than I dared to. And he said, okay. So thank you, Lord, The other one is just a sports piece I was experimenting with, sort of a transparent, glowing sort of look. That's just a personal piece, so called 3 and 2, and if you look at the scoreboard, you can see what's going on with that. So we have also another area as illustrators we call institutional. It's sort of a general term. You're doing, say, posters for Broadway plays. You're doing sort of it's certain corporate work, but it's. I'll give you an example. I designed stamps, a couple of series of stamps for the U.S. government. This is sporting horses. I did the World Cup soccer stamps. I can't remember the year now. When was the World Cup in America? 1990s maybe, or I don't remember. But so I did those. The one on the right that's really complicated, that's the local phone book cover in Sugarbush, Vermont. And they wanted sort of a collage of what the valley looked like, with a whole bunch of old photographs that they gave me. And so I was doing a bunch of this kind of work where you have a lot of overlapping images. We call them montages or collages. And some of it's pretty technical. But here's another example of what I took on as an illustrator, but also I really had more of a mindset as a fine artist, as a gallery painter. So I really took on those kinds of projects. So I had a friend of mine in Vermont. He sat on a board at the state capitol, and they wanted to commission a portrait of Chester Arthur. He was the only U.S. president that came from Vermont, so this was a state pride kind of thing. So he suggested to the committee, he knew me, and that I might be the person for it, and I went and had a meeting with them, and they weren't convinced that I could do a portrait that looked like, a big oil portrait that looked like something was painted, 120 years ago. So I said, okay. So I went home and I did the one on the right. That's, 16 by 20 or something like that, just as a portrait of him. And they also wanted me, he was kind of a bulky fellow. So they wanted me to slim him down and look a little bit better, Vermont pride and all of that, I guess. So I did the one on the right, and I brought that into the committee, and they said, yeah, I guess you can paint. So they gave me the assignment, and so I did the painting on the left. I slimmed him down a little bit. He looks really good, and it looks like an old portrait from 1890, something like that. It's got a shiny varnish on it, and it hangs in the atrium of the Capitol building. So you walk in, and they're proud of Chester Arthur. Other than that, I don't know a whole lot about him. So that was kind of a fun thing. I've got a picture I cherish. I have a grandson, and I don't know how old Josh was, but he sent me a picture a few years back, and he's probably like 16, 17 years old, and he's in the front. He's in the Capitol going like, my grandpa painted that. So those are some of the perks you get when you do interesting work like this. So the one on the left is something I did for the Presidential Prayer Team. It's an organization out of Arizona, and I did this, 20 years ago. It's a colonial looking out a window at a modern city with a Bible and the Declaration of Independence on the table. And it was their idea, and so that was just another example. They invited me out. We did limited prints that I signed, and then they invited me out to do a speaking engagement in Arizona to the group. So that's another indication of what you do when you're a freelance illustrator. You look at every project that comes through the door, and you decide if it's for you and you want to do it. The reason I put the other one in on the right is early in my career, this was way pre-computer. I was always enamored with this kind of look, this sort of, it was something that was happening in the illustration market by a couple of pretty well-known illustrators. You probably won't know them, but I had fun doing this stuff. And see how technical it is? A lot of that is actually drawn. So I do drawings and really tight technical things, and I would do oil washes on top or layer different images. And so I did a bunch of corporate work, probably the first 10 years of my illustration career. And at a certain point, I said, I'm not going to do that anymore. I had to make a decision with how I was going to market myself as an illustrator. So I kind of dropped all that kind of work. But there may be a few other examples of that sort of thing. I did covers for the U.S. Army for they did do an annual catalog of their new weapons systems. So here's an example of a drawing I sent into, they'd send me all these pictures, so I designed and created that, did a drawing, sent it in, and then below is what the original painting looks like. for the U.S. Army. I think I did 3 different covers for them. So, the one on the left, I did a limited edition print with B.B. King. If you know B.B. King, sort of the founder of American blues guitar. And I was so excited because I was a lifelong guitar player and I played blues guitar. That's what I did when I was young. It was really, I almost went that way. And I was going to go to Las Vegas where the prints were produced, and he had a home there, and I was supposed to sit at a table with B.B. King all day and sign prints. And of course I was excited about that. We could talk shop and talk about guitars and blues. And at the last minute, he had a family emergency in California, and he had to go, so he couldn't come. So that was a disappointment for me. But he sold that print off his website, and we sold the print out. I still have that original, and B.B. King did sign that painting. His signature's on the painting, so it's in my collection. The one on the right was a real pro bono type job for the National Guard in Vermont. So I did that painting and gave it to the Vermont National Guard for their promotion. Oh, I did a variety of other things. This falls under the institutional area of illustration. I worked for Danbury Mint or the Franklin Mint or a couple of these collectible companies. I did a few things for them. This was I don't even remember what the actual project was, but I designed something for Silent Screen Stars, and that's the title of that. Had fun doing that sort of thing. Oh, and I did tons of books. I probably did 150 book covers in my illustration career, paperbacks, hardcovers. So what you're looking at there is just sort of a collage, or I did a time cover for their 70th anniversary. I think 3 of them that are in there are interior illustrations for books. And those are just some samples. I'll give you a bunch more. The one on the left is the first paperback I did when I first started freelancing in 1978. When I left, I worked for McGraw-Hill in 1977 for a year. Then my new wife and I, Val, we moved back to Vermont, and I got an agent in New York. And very shortly, I started getting work, and I was busy for 23 years. So one of the first jobs I got was this paperback cover. I don't even remember the title. So I got a couple of local kids and posed them for models. And he's got a couple of dead rabbits on his shoulder. So we went out and found some rabbits and shot them. And no, we didn't. He's like, I don't know what I gave him. I gave him some kind of a prop. I don't know. It's probably a rolled up towel or something, So I had to turn them into rabbits. On the right, there was a project several years later that the guy wanted. He wanted to put a new Peter Pan book out, but add another character, another young child, so that the children reading the book could pretend they were that additional child. So I did three different paintings for a sample for that project. This is one of them, and the models are. Peter Pan's one of my daughters when she was, so I turned her into Peter Pan. The next one is a niece, and then a daughter again, and then I think my son at the back. And I had them lay on a dining room table, pretend like they were flying, and turned them into that, and painted Tinkerbell and the whole thing. So it was kind of a fun project to work on, and the project never went anywhere. And one of the guys who was trying to get it off the ground, he disappeared with my 3 paintings. So I never got those back, and I still have to repent at how upset I am about that even today. So I want those back. But that was a long time ago, and it's something that also as artists we run into a lot of interesting situations from the business side of things. One thing I will say about the Western art market, I've had nothing but incredible relationships with all you folks, museums, collectors, galleries. I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. You guys are family. I mean, and I seriously mean that. Compared to working out of New York or LA, I did some work in Europe, you never know what you're going to run into. There's a lot of, shady kind of things going on all the time. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. The illustration on the left was it was a Reader's Digest book, I think they were marketing. It was called Icon. It was a spy sort of thing. So that was an interior illustration. The one on the right, it goes back to this kind of thing I used to experiment with, sort of this collage kind of look. By the way, that's a great book. I mean, that was probably done in the early 1980s. I'm sure you could still get it. It's called The Last Algonquin. The Algonquins were Eastern Indian nation in what's now New England. And it's a true story, and they found one in like 1927 that walked out of the woods in Connecticut. They'd been living in the woods near the ocean. And his life story goes all the way back pre-Civil War. And he'd been hidden there. He thought he was the last Algonquin. They raised an Algonquin reservation in northern New England where most of the Algonquins, pure blood, didn't exist anymore. But that's where they ended up. But he was so isolated. This is a true story. He thought he was the last one. So when he was a very old man, this young boy used to go fishing off the rocks in Connecticut. And he would see them from the woods over a period of time. And he finally walked out and met this 12-year-old boy and said, I want to tell you my life story. And he did, because he knew he didn't have much longer to live. And so the book is about his whole story of his life. It's fascinating. Somebody ought to do a movie on it. But that's the cover I did called The Last Algonquin. I'm just telling you that because if you want to read an incredible book, look it up. And I did a lot of these sort of Caribbean romance books, I guess, covers. I don't know what these are about. I never read. Fortunately, I didn't have to read the books. And so these are paperback covers, and the same thing. There's a collage of imagery, and you leave a lot of room for type for the book cover and all the other things that go with it. So these are a couple of examples. Now we'll get into an area I did with movie work, and over the years I was doing a couple of campaigns a year. Even though I'm in Vermont, the work was coming out of LA, and that was okay. We could pull that off. So I did a lot of what's called movie comps, which are finished movie paintings for ideas they would send, and they'd create a bunch of posters, test market them, and they'd pick one or maybe two to market the movies. And so I did a lot of comp work that nobody's ever seen, and I did have a few that went all the way to publication in the marketplace. So this was Waterworld. This is the first one of the ones I did. That's an idea they told me to paint. And the next one was published. It was for a reprint of Casablanca when they had Laserdisc covers for the 50th anniversary, the re-release of Casablanca. So that was a big painting I did for that, and that was published. This is another example of what would happen in the movie industry. So I'd do these drawings that were ideas that were sent to me by the art director, and they'd send me a package of black and white stills from the movie set. They always have still photographers, and they'd send me a bunch of reference and give me some certain ideas, and I'd do these drawings. It sounds so archaic now with the digital world we live in, but this is the way we had to do it. So these are this was my first real movie that I worked on called Greystoke, Tarzan, Lord of the Apes. And so these are a couple of ideas. Here's a couple more. And they'd have meetings, the marketing people, and they would look at these drawings and say, well, we like this one, no, we don't like that one, let's try this, let's try that. So in the end, the one on the left, they actually had me do a painting, and I got a phone call and said, we've picked that painting to be the movie poster. And I was over the moon. I'm in my early 30s, and I'm probably 30 years old or 31, and I had my first movie success. And then they called me back about 3 weeks later and said, well, somebody in the movie didn't want to use photographs. So we're not using your artwork, and they just put a couple of photographs on the poster, and they were nowhere near as nice as my painting. Nowhere near as nice. So, you're high one day and you're deflated. My family always says, Dad, you never get all that excited. Yeah, but I never get all that depressed either, And I've learned that through being in this industry. You need to have pretty thick skin and a lot of fortitude. And the one on the right is a painting I did of Tarzan for a book. And the Edgar Rice Burroughs Museum in Memphis called me up later, and they'd seen it, and they loved that painting, so they bought the painting for the museum. The director there saw it. It's one of my favorite Tarzan paintings. I said, okay. So we sold him that, and that's in that museum. Here's another movie project. It was called The Quest. It's Jean-Claude Van Damme. And this is an example. He sent me a bunch of pictures of his face, but they were all flat lighting. I said, they're terrible pictures. So you have to be quick on your feet. So when I used him in these drawings and everything, I had to add shadows, and I had to create a lighting effect just out of my head. So these are a couple of designs. And the one on the left is the one they picked, and so I did a painting. And these paintings are probably 42 inches high, 27 inches wide. So I'll quickly tell you what happens in the movie business. I get a call from my agent in New York on Thursday, and he said, well, I got you a movie job, and you're going to get a package tomorrow, and it's going to have all this stuff, and there'll be a little thumbnail sketch from the art director, and you're going to have a bunch of photographs. And Monday morning, they're having a marketing meeting in Los Angeles at 10 o'clock, and they need to have a finished painting in Los Angeles Monday morning at 10 o'clock. And so I'd get the stuff on Friday, and I'd have to get the painting done and put it on an airplane in Burlington, Vermont, Sunday night, fly it overnight to LA, messenger service it to the meeting, and get it there by 10 o'clock, if you took the job on. And that's the reality of doing what you sometimes had to do as an illustrator. Some of my illustrator friends can attest that, you don't eat or sleep for 48 hours, and you're full of anxiety, and it's tough stuff. And I'm not making that up. That happened to me several times. Sometimes you'd have maybe a week to do a piece of art. So, but you took the job on and you just worked your tail off. You went crazy. And I had a way of painting, even though it's oil, it's pretty thin. You'd use dryers, you do oil washes, you do under drawings. And because I worked in oil, that made it more challenging. Most movie artists worked in acrylic or gouache or something that was water-based, would dry quicker. But so that's an example. They didn't publish it, so I still have the original painting. I think I've sold some of the drawings to collectors, but that's a little bit of information about what it's like to be an illustrator. I did a Wizard of Oz piece it was a point of purchase for the 50th anniversary release of the Wizard of Oz on a laser disc, and they use these in posters and remember the movie rental stores? You're going to rent movies. That's that. And on the right, we recreated a movie poster for It's a Wonderful Life. There'd never been a really great poster for that classic movie. It was just black and white photographs. So there was a company that was reproducing movie posters, and so I created that, and they sold those all over America and in Europe. That movie is very popular even in Europe, believe it or not. So there's old Jack on the left. That was a sequel to Chinatown called The Two Jakes. And the one probably the most famous one I did is on the right. I did the painting of Clint Eastwood for Pale Rider, and that was also very early on in my career. It's mostly kind of a drawing with oil wash over it. And there were 10, the art director said there were about 10 posters created for that, and they had them lined up in a room. They mocked them up for posters, and they said Clint came in and he walked down the line and he came back and he said, I want that one. And so I lucked out, and that was pretty exciting. So then the advertising agency bought the original from me and gave it to Clint. So I don't know where it is, and I think he still owns it somewhere. So, and the other interesting thing is originally all that row of guys at the bottom was all across his hat on the top. So they test marketed that, and 3 or 4 weeks later they called back and they said, we want you to take those guys up there and put them down here. So this was like 1984. So they sent the original back. I had to paint it out on top, and I had to re-put them at the bottom. Where today you just clip it out with a computer, cut and paste it, and you'd be done in a half an hour. Back then you literally had to move the painting across the country. I had to repaint it and send it all the way back. And that's what we had to deal with back then. So I also did a lot of faith-based and Christian work. Some of it was personal, but also for publishers. This was mostly in the 1990s. And I've got several paintings on loan to the Museum of Biblical Art in Dallas. Just to let you know, I'm a non-denominational Christian, so I've done a lot of music and gone to Africa several times in the 90s. We were building schools over there, and it's been a big part of my life. Seriously, it's what's gotten me through my entire life, and not really all that shy about it. So I just thought I'd show you a few of the faith-based things I've done, and some of them are book covers. I'm actually in a Bible, believe it or not. I did a cover, and they did a page, and I did a bunch of inside illustrations, and 20 pages in at the end, there's a thing about me in a Bible. I don't know, that's so sacrilegious. I can't even begin to talk about it. It's awful. But anyway, so there I'm in a shepherd's costume with my glasses on. I modeled, and we used friends and church members, and my wife made a bunch of biblical costumes over the years. The one on the right is the Light of the World. Most of these were done as a print and sold in Christian bookstores, which really almost don't exist anymore. So here's an example of an idea I had. I had a friend of mine, put my Jesus costume on, and he had his 2 kids, and that's a little Polaroid. So that was the reference I used for the painting on the right. And when I showed it to him, his kids couldn't believe that their dad looked like Jesus. I don't know. Whatever Jesus looks like. So here was one I did. It was actually based on an idea that Norman Rockwell did years ago. It was about Storyland, and there was he had all these characters walking in a dreamland behind these 2 kids laying on the floor reading books. I always loved that illustration. I remember seeing it as a kid. So I had this idea to do it sort of for this marketplace, and so I had a friend of mine and his daughter sit on a couch in my living room. I put the dog in there, and the little boy on the right is my son. And I put all these biblical characters going across the back, and that was sold as a print. And ultimately, Dayspring, they're up in Siloam Springs, Arkansas, made a book out of it. And they broke it into chapters to talk about a Bible storybook about all the characters in the back. So that's another example. You never know what's going to happen. I just did a painting, turned it into a print, turned it into a book. Where these things go. The one on the left is that's actually my wife. It's called He Shall Hear My Voice. And when we first got married, I was trying to figure out what I was going to paint, and even when I was illustrating. And so I took some Polaroids of her. I said, beautiful light coming through this window. So I had these little Polaroids, and I kept them for like almost 20 years. And I was going through my stuff, and I pulled out these things. I said, that one pose, it's a little black and white Polaroid. I said, that's a great pose. So I turned it into that painting, and we sent it in, and it's a limited edition, an open edition print. We sold them all out. It's been on a half a dozen book covers around the world, like it calls from. We want to use it on a book I'm writing. So another example where I can license artwork to make some additional money, but also in this case, they're using it for ministry purposes. I still get calls on this. We're having a big conference. We want to use it on a brochure. I say, sure, I'll send them a file. So, but the reference to that came from a little black and white Polaroid, so I turned it into that, made up the background, and painted that in one day. So normally that's not normal, but I knew that that's really maybe only a couple times it's happened to me in my life where I had an idea, had started, and it was like something took over me, literally. And I just did this thing, and I got done, and I walked in and showed it to my wife, and I said, honey, you never look so good. There you are. Whenever we have an argument, I say, this is how you're supposed to be. That doesn't work. Don't try that, men, gentlemen. Something happened somewhere, and they wanted to know if I had a picture of Jesus, like to put a small painting to put in this show, and I don't even remember now exactly what it was about. So I created that one on the right. And I've done a bunch of those kinds of paintings over the years. And here's an interesting project. So I was asked to do, well, let me explain. There's the Seventh-day Adventists, their ministry, I guess, is healthcare. So they have a gigantic hospital in Chicago, a huge complex. They do cancer stuff, and I mean, it's huge. So I was contacted because in their cancer ward for children, they were going to do, on the days of creation, 7 very large paintings in the cancer ward. And so they had hired an artist, Larry Dykes, who's from Texas, who had done a lot of that kind of work. And he did the first 3, but he became very ill and he couldn't continue on, so they asked me to do the next 4. So I agreed to do that project, and these are pretty big. It's 66 inches wide, I think. And so these are hanging in the hospital in Chicago, and I went out when they dedicated the hospital and gave a talk. So this is, I wish I could, I'm going to walk over here and see if I can remember what it's day 5, the creation of sea creatures and winged fowl. So I remember the interesting thing is I had originally on the sketch, I had some dolphins, in the water. And somebody said, well, they're not really sea creatures. What are they, mammals or something, And I said, well, I don't know. And there's a little shark in there, and I had him really big, on the first sketch. And that's a little scary for the kids. So so that's one. I'm looking at my thing down here in case you're wondering what I'm looking at. This was day 6, the creation of beasts of the earth, man and woman. And there's always that interesting thing about, Adam and Eve are nude. Are you going to cover them up with leaves, or are you going to, So that's how I got around that. I had the sunshine. You can't see their tushes, So you can see from an illustration standpoint how some of the things I had done a lot of, how that carried over into they're almost murals. I mean, 66 inches is, they're pretty big paintings. So those are 2 out of the 4 I created. Also, when Mel Gibson was doing the Passion of the Christ movie a few years ago, Icon Productions, through another company, contacted me and said they're thinking about doing a bunch of limited edition prints to go along with the movie. The movie wasn't out yet. So I went to a place where I saw an early screening where the soundtrack wasn't quite done and stuff. And if you've ever seen that movie, it's just incredibly moving. So this is one of the paintings I did, and they ended up not going that route, but I just threw that in there. These are based on some photographs they sent me from the film. And then I had a chance to, let's see if I can remember which one this is. Yeah, if you know who Max Lucado is, he's a big Christian author. They were republishing one of his books, and they asked me if I'd take on the project to do a bunch of inside illustrations, which I normally didn't do, but I did. And this actually was after I left illustration. It was about 12, 13 years ago. So I did 14 paintings, I think 14, to go on the inside. So imagine there's a gutter in the book, and this book opens up, and this is your spread, and they put some type on it. So this is one of the paintings I would do for that book. It's a street scene in Jerusalem. It was based on a story of a Roman centurion, and who was at the cross, and now he's visiting with a bunch of followers of Jesus in a room. He's trying to figure out what happened. He knew something crazy had happened. So I hired a local guy, bought a Roman costume, got him all dressed up, and used him as the model throughout the book. So that's another example of a painting for that. Here's another one, and there's type. So it's a soft vignette. And I did a lot of what we call vignettes, which are not complete paintings. They're soft around the edges. And I also illustrated another book for Zondervan on the life of Christ, 2nd chapter of Matthew. And so that was called Good News of Great Joy. That was done around the year 2000. So I'm Joseph, and my daughter's on the donkey. And we won't talk about how weird that is, but there's, so that's throughout the book. I modeled myself for that. I made myself probably look a lot better than I really did. I did used to have black hair and black beard, so this is a nativity scene. And these are several of these are made into prints and sold in the Christian marketplace. So, and, you know, they're friends, and my son's in there. So this is some of the work I did. Okay, so we're gonna morph out of now illustration. We're gonna get into what we call fine art or gallery art. And I'd always done some of my own personal easel painting, even when I was illustrating. I worked with a gallery in Stowe, Vermont, and would sell paintings occasionally. They were landscapes and things like that. So I did a lot of still lifes. I really had fun with these because I love the shadow patterns, and I was also learning how to paint in a different way, using more paint, more alla bravura. My technique, I wanted to change it and get away from illustration. So these are some examples of things that I painted sort of when I was illustrating, but as I morphed into fine art, and ultimately it became a full-time Western artist. And I ended up in that process, I was contacted by a guy from Tokyo who had a gallery, and he was representing some American painters. And somebody on his staff knew about my work in America, so he came to see me in America, and I hooked up with this gallery in Tokyo. So I've sold 150 paintings over there in 10 years. I took some trips to Tokyo, and what I was selling mostly were landscapes and still lifes and some figurative work. So this would be an example of a still life painting I did. Here's a few more. And you can tell I'm experimenting. I love shadow patterns and a little bit of an abstract quality to these. And I was experimenting, moving toward a career to get out of illustration. So these were really fun for me to do, and they sold very well. I still get requests from people occasionally, are you doing any more of those kind of paintings? And no. I mean, I have some in my collection, but I was in New England at the time, so I was doing landscapes, and here I started putting figures into these landscapes. I worked with that gallery in Stowe, and so I was experimenting, trying to figure out where I was going to go. And some of these, they almost really could be Western paintings at this point. I mean, I'm morphing it in that direction, and I was always a big fan of the best Western painters, and I did know about all the illustrators who'd gone into the Western market, and always watched their work. So it was kind of in the back of my mind that maybe that's, you know, I'd really like to do. So this is actually one of the Von Trapp farms. The Von Trapp family lived near us, and so Martin, this is his farm. He's got some sheep, and so I was taking pictures of this gal, and you know, here comes a calf walking up to her in the middle of it. And so that was a piece that could very easily probably could be in this show, I suppose. Sue, what do you think? Oh, she said yes. So, you know, it could be an old Western or pioneer type painting. So, but you can see my work has more of a painterly feel. If you saw the original, it's got more paint on it. I'm moving away from the illustration thing that I had done for over 20 years. So also in this time, you know, I was painting all kinds of things. The one on the left is my daughter, who's actually here, and when she was sleeping. And so I had taken a picture of her years before, a slide or something, and I did a little painting of her. And the one on the right is her daughter, Bailey, and when she was little. Bailey's now 22 or 23, and so I had her hold a doll and hug her little doll, and I had fun making up all the dolls on the shelf. You know, I reverted to my childhood and was painting dolls. Not that I played with dolls when I was a kid, but I painted them. That was fun. I remember doing that. So one on the left is another landscape piece, gal in the garden. And also I hooked up with the Legacy Gallery. It's a long story. I won't get into it. Around 2002 or 3. And I wasn't really doing overtly Western stuff then. I was doing this kind of work. So they took me on. And it was really a few years later that I started doing really all Western work. But the one on the right is from a photo shoot that I had done when I was doing some faith-based stuff. And I always thought it would make a really nice painting. So I did that and sent it to the Legacy, and they sold it. I was also doing figurative things during this time. The one on the lower left is my niece's daughter, and it's called The Red Book. And that actually, last year, ended up on a calendar in Japan. They contacted me, and occasionally, this is licensing again, so I sent them a bunch of stuff. There was a competition. So for a couple of times, my figurative work from America was winning the competition in Japan to end up on a bank calendar in Tokyo. I mean, how could you ever figure that out? But that was one of them they used, you know. And the other were also part of a show in Japan at the gallery several years back. They were doing a figurative show. So those are kind of experimental sorts of paintings. They're a lot of fun for me to do. Sample there. I was doing a lot of Vermont landscapes. This is a river, you know, over the mountain from us in Vermont. And when I got it all done, I said, you know, it really needs a covered bridge. So I put a covered bridge in there. If you went to that spot, there's no bridge. No, you don't care, do you? I mean, you know, it's Vermont. Everybody wants to see a covered bridge. So these are some other landscapes I'm doing in the local area where I lived. And these were sold in the gallery up in Stowe. Occasionally I'd send one to the Legacy in Scottsdale. So another thing that happened to me is I was in New York, and around the year 2000, I went to a portrait workshop. I was become friends with John Howard Sandon, who's a world-renowned portrait painter. And I'd met him several years earlier. We became really good friends, and I would visit him in Connecticut. And so I was considering a career in serious portrait painting when I got out of illustration. And he said, you know, if you want to do it, you could do it, and you could be very successful at it. And so I went to a portrait workshop in New York, and between one of the sessions, everybody went in, and I'm out in the atrium for whatever reason. I turn around, and sitting at a table over here was Richard Schmidt, all by himself. And Richard was doing something. And I'd heard that he just moved to southern Vermont. So I went over and introduced myself, and he was very gracious and very nice. And I had a stack of 4x5 of my paintings that I had just carried with me. And he said, let me look at those. Are those yours? I said, yeah. So this is around the year 2000. And so he looked at them, and he finally, you know, he said, oh, God, these are great. You know, where do you live? And I told him, I'm 2 hours north of where you are. And he said, well, Nancy and I are starting our Putney Painters in a couple of months, and you've got to come and paint with us. So I did. So over a period of a couple of years, I would drive down and spend a Saturday and paint with Richard and Nancy. And they were great because it helped me segue from illustration into fine art. So we're painting from life. My first session down there, we get set up. Oh, it's going to be a model today. So I'm sitting here, and there's Richard in a chair painting a model, you know, with another 8 or 10 people around us. Most of you know who Richard Schmidt is? Yeah, most of you do. You know, incredible master, huge inspiration. I'm sure has he been in this show before? I don't know. I can't remember. But anyway, he passed on a few years ago, which is America lost one of its greatest painters in history, you know. So I had a chance to paint with him and Nancy, and of course I'm pretty intimidated. There's Richard painting, but I really sort of fell right into it. It was, even though I hadn't done much live easel painting, I just fell into it, and they were great. So these are a couple landscapes I painted on site with the group. We'd go out and get in a field and put your easel up and just paint. I remember the one on the right I was painting, and all of a sudden at some point in the day all the cows came out, and I'm, you know, no bulls as far as I could tell. And so I'm pretty much surrounded by dairy cows at some point finishing that painting. I treasure those times, getting to paint with Richard and Nancy. Wonderful, wonderful people. Here's a landscape up near Stowe. Some more. How much time do I have left? 5 minutes? Wow. Oh, man. I'm just going to fly along real quick then, but that's my bad. So I did a lot of teaching. These are just some pictures of me teaching. Western art. Take a minute to read that if you want. This is really kind of what I'm about. And then I'll fly ahead with, hopefully you found that interesting, all my Western stuff. A lot of you are already familiar with it. But I love the people say the American Western frontier. For me, the stories of their lives fill me with passionate inspiration. The trials and challenges they faced when chasing their hopes and dreams were dealt with head on. Words like fortitude, endurance, faith, family, courage, survival, and grit come to mind. All of this was set within a landscape of impossible and awe-inspiring beauty. This is the appeal of America's 19th century history, and this is the appeal of the art that reflects it. So that's what inspires me to do Western art. These are some of my early ones. I'm just going to fly along, hundreds of Western paintings. And I'm really, for the most part, narrative storytelling. This is one of my studios before I moved to Idaho. This is my current studio up near Coeur d'Alene. These are some inside pictures of the studio. Art of the West did an article in my studio about a little over a year ago, I think, or was it 2 years ago? I don't remember. But this, shows you the painting room, and this is where I spend my days. I'm blessed to be able to walk 60 feet and go into that environment. Earlier on, I was doing a lot of more pioneer and old-time cowboy stuff. The drawing on the left was a gold medal drawing at Cowboy Artists a few years back. These are all sold in mostly museum shows and the Legacy, Settlers West, wherever. So these are, this was a Patron's Choice Award and the Artist's Choice Award one year, the Idle Award. Hopefully there won't be any questions because they're going to bring the hook out and yank me off the stage in a minute. I knew this was going to happen. There's just way too much. Eventually, I started to do more and more Native American. I put that off for a while because I wanted to do a lot of research, and it took me quite a few years before I felt comfortable starting to do this kind of work. So I've shown at the Russell and various other places. I'm in about a half dozen museums at this point in their collections. Here's an example of what I would start with: thumbnail sketches. I gather all my reference. Maybe I'd done a color sketch, and then I draw it out. I just start oil wash, put the stormy sky in first to start. Step by step, you're working your way through it. You're solving problems or addressing challenges with edges and value. You can see how I'm working, in this case, top to bottom, because I wanted to get the environment correct. This particular case, I figured out how I wanted to have the river work with the background piece. Step by step. This is somewhat typical, but I have other ways I work as well. This is one example. It goes all the way to that, and if we had time, you could see there were subtle changes being done all along. And there's the final painting. So that was sold at my solo show at the Legacy in 2020. Small paintings. The one on the left was in the first year I was in Prix West. And the guy who bought it, he got it, and right after the show was over, before dinner, another guy goes up and says, "I want to buy that painting from you." The guy says, "No, I just bought it." And he said, "Well, I gave you, jacked up the price 20 or 30%. The guy wouldn't sell it, so I kept saying, "Sell it and we'll split it. We'll split the..." The little one on the right was in Prix West. Cowboy Artists of America painting. These are all just samples of what I've done in my Western career. Occasionally I'll do some action stuff. I don't do much of that, but it was kind of fun. Andy Thomas influenced me, I think, if you know his work. This is a great big one I did for the Coeur d'Alene art auction, Prairie Fire. The painting on the right won the Art of the Spirit Award in Cody, not Cody, yeah, up at the Buffalo Bill Museum one year. So these are old-time stories. This was in Prix West, so the James Foundation bought it. It's in the James Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida. And some of your docents thought the museum should have bought this because it's a great teaching thing for when kids come through. There's a whole story behind that. So I love old-time characters. That's in the Briscoe Museum collection. I did a couple rodeo pieces just for the fun of it. One of them, the one on the right, was bought one year, and two women got into a fight over it, and they live next door to each other. This is in Indianapolis. Oh, I shouldn't bring up Indianapolis, sorry. Sorry. So they got into a fight over it, and so I said, I'll paint one the next year, and I did, and that other woman, she still didn't get drawn from the box. So anyway, these are, more of, we could talk forever. Each one of these has a story behind them. This was a gold medal for oil painting at Cowboy Artists a couple of years ago. These are pretty good-sized paintings. The one on the left was cover of Western Art Collector. This is a big commission I did last year. And more paintings. The one on the left last year was in Prix. The one on the right is in this year's show. Likewise with that. So I figured I'd plug myself just a tiny bit. So those two are in the show here. So really, it looks like time's up. So I appreciate you coming so very much. Sue, what do you think? Do you want one question or what? We're taking a break. But Gladys is next, so we don't want to infringe on that. But is there anybody who has? Well, I'll take one question, and they can abuse me for it. Yeah, you got one right here. Go ahead, quick.
One part of your genius is your backgrounds. And I wondered if you could just speak to a little of your decision-making when you think of a background for your foreground subjects.
Well, particularly when you're doing Western art, it's incredibly important to be able to paint landscapes, I believe, if you're going to do representational, particularly narrative paintings. So I've always loved landscapes and loved landscape painters. And so I just keep thinking of all different kinds of things, what would be dramatic and what would be tell the story the best and what would have the most appeal to collectors. Really, it's not that difficult. I change them a lot. I try to challenge or solve a lot of these challenges early on in the process, but sometimes you go back and repaint a whole background or make major changes, As oil painters, we can do that, and we all do it. So it's a work in progress every time. So thank you so much for coming. You've been great, okay?